Entitled stepmom demands I give her son my car since I don't need it, and called me selfish when I refused. So, I cut her off and exposed her lies to the family. I'm 27, and my dad married my stepmom 6 years ago. From day one, it was obvious she had her own priorities, and I wasn't one of them. She came with a son, my stepbrother, who's now 22. It didn't take long for her to make it clear she thought the world revolved around him. The first time I met her, she was pleasant enough, overly nice even. She was full of compliments and kept saying how excited she was to be part of our family. It felt fake, but I brushed it off. But as soon as they got married, her attitude shifted. Suddenly, I was an outsider in my own dad's house. I didn't live there full-time anymore, but I still had a room for when I visited. Stepmom started dropping hints that I should stop coming over so often, saying things like, "Your dad needs to focus on this new chapter," or, "Don't you think it's time to be more independent?" I didn't say anything at first, but the digs became more pointed. She didn't want me there, plain and simple. The first major incident came when I moved out for good. I'd left a lot of childhood stuff behind, old trophies, books, sentimental things. One day, I came over and found all my stuff packed into garbage bags and shoved into a damp corner of the basement. Some of it was ruined because the basement had a leak. When I asked her why she hadn't just left it in my old room, she shrugged and said, "Stepbrother needed the space. It's not like you live here anymore." Dad didn't say much. He just mumbled something about not wanting to argue. I was pissed but didn't make a scene. I figured it wasn't worth it since I wasn't living there anymore. Still, it stung that she had no respect for my things or my place in the family. It only got worse from there. A year later, I found out my dad had saved a small wedding fund for me over the years. It wasn't a ton of money, but it was thoughtful. Somehow, stepmom found out about it and decided it wasn't fair that stepbrother didn't get the same. She told my dad they should split the money evenly between us, even though stepbrother didn't even have a girlfriend. When I refused, she went on this whole spiel about how I was being selfish and how stepbrother deserved a chance too. I told her the fund wasn't hers to give away, and that it wasn't my responsibility to make things fair for her son. She sulked for weeks, making snide comments every time I visited. Dad avoided the topic entirely. Fast forward to last week, when the real blow-up happened. My dad invited me over for dinner, which I assumed was just a regular family thing. When I got there, stepmom was being unusually nice. She kept going on about how hard it was for young people these days and how lucky I was to be doing so well. I nodded along, but something about the way she kept bringing it up made me suspicious. After dinner, she casually said, "You know, stepbrother has been struggling a lot lately. He's trying so hard, but he just doesn't have the resources. And you have that car sitting in your driveway most of the time. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could let him use it? It would really help him get to work and school." I stared at her, trying to figure out if she was serious. "Wait," I said. "Are you asking me to give him my car?" She smiled, like she was talking to a clueless child. "Not give it permanently. Just let him borrow it indefinitely. You work from home most of the time, so you don't really need it." It took me a second to process the audacity. "That's not happening," I said. "I paid for that car myself. I worked hard for it, and I need it for my own errands and appointments. If stepbrother needs a car, he can save up and buy one himself." Her smile vanished. "Oh, come on," she said, her tone sharper now. "You're being selfish. What kind of brother are you? Stepbrother is just trying to get ahead, and you have so much already. It wouldn't kill you to share." I wasn't in the mood to argue. "No," I said. "What's selfish is expecting me to give up something I worked for because your son doesn't feel like earning it himself. He doesn't even have his driver's license yet. How is that my problem?" Stepbrother, who had been quiet this whole time, muttered, "I didn't even ask for this," which made things even more awkward. Stepmom ignored him and turned to my dad. "Are you really going to let him talk to me like this?" To my surprise, Dad backed me up for once. "Stepmom, he's right," he said. "It's his car, and he has no obligation to give it to anyone. You need to drop this." She stormed out of the room, muttering about how ungrateful I was and how I was tearing the family apart. Stepbrother awkwardly excused himself and went to his room. I stayed behind to talk to Dad. He admitted stepmom had been pushing the idea for weeks, but didn't know how to bring it up without causing a fight. I told him he needed to start standing up to her because her entitlement was getting out of control. He nodded but didn't say much, which honestly didn't surprise me. Over the next few days, stepmom went on a full-blown rampage. She left me multiple voicemails, alternating between guilt-tripping and yelling. One message said, "You're tearing this family apart. I hope you're happy making your brother feel worthless." Another said, "If you can't do this one simple thing for family, then maybe you don't deserve to be part of it." I didn't respond. I blocked her number and told Dad I wouldn't be engaging with her until she apologized. But stepmom wasn't the kind of person to back off just because I wasn't responding. A couple of weeks later, she called me from a different number. This time, she claimed the family was in a temporary financial crunch and asked to borrow money from my emergency savings. When I asked what the money was for, she admitted it was to cover stepbrother's driving test, some new clothes for him, and a down payment on a car. "You're doing so well financially," she said. "It's not like you'll even notice it's gone." I couldn't believe the nerve. My emergency fund is for emergencies, mine, not stepbrother's poor planning. If you're struggling, maybe he should get a part-time job instead of waiting for handouts. She didn't take it well. "You're so selfish. After everything your father has done for you, this is how you repay us." I hung up on her and blocked that number too. Then there was the time stepbrother texted me out of the blue, saying he needed a place to stay because he was stressed out living with stepmom. I felt bad for him at first. Living with her couldn't be easy. But instead of asking if he could stay with me, he just told me he'd be moving in the next day and that we could figure out the rent situation later. When I asked what he meant, he said he wasn't planning to pay rent, but would help out with chores. I shut that down fast. "Sorry, but my apartment isn't available. If you're stressed, maybe it's time to have an honest talk with your mom or look into a roommate situation." He tried to guilt-trip me, saying I was abandoning him when he needed help, but I didn't budge. I told him I wasn't in a position to take on a roommate and that he needed to figure out his own plan. A few months later, stepmom pulled her most ridiculous stunt yet. She decided to announce to the family that I'd be hosting Christmas dinner at my apartment. She didn't ask me. She just told everyone to bring their dishes to my place, and even started giving me instructions on how to rearrange my furniture to fit everyone. When I confronted her about it, she acted like it was already set in stone. "You're young and have the most space," she said. "It's not a big deal for you to host. Family is about sacrifice." I was done playing nice. I sent a group text to the entire family, letting them know I hadn't agreed to host Christmas and wouldn't be available for any holiday gatherings at my place. I added, "If anyone needs clarification, please check with stepmom about why she thought it was okay to make plans on my behalf." The fallout was amazing. Relatives started questioning her behavior, and she tried to play it off as a misunderstanding, but no one was buying it. After the car incident, things between stepmom and me hit an all-time low. She avoided me at family gatherings, but that didn't stop her from trying to stir the pot whenever she could. She started telling relatives I was selfish and ungrateful, spinning every situation to make herself look like the victim. One cousin, who's close to my dad, pulled me aside at a barbecue to ask why I wouldn't help out stepbrother when he was struggling. I gave him the full rundown, and he was stunned. "That's not how she told it," he said. "She made it sound like you were hoarding some fancy sports car you never use and didn't care about family." This was a recurring theme. Whenever I set a boundary, stepmom would twist the story to make me look like the bad guy. But the more people found out the truth, the less her manipulations worked. The final straw came last month. Stepmom found out I'd been promoted at work and decided it was time for another favor. She called me out of nowhere to ask if I'd help pay for stepbrother to take a life-changing coding boot camp. She said it would set him up for a great career, and he just needs someone to believe in him. I told her flat out no. I'm not a bank, and I'm done financing his potential. If he wants it, he can take out a loan or save up for it himself. That's when she lost it. She started yelling about how I was tearing the family apart and how stepbrother would never forget how I'd abandoned him. Then she said something that crossed the line. "Maybe your dad would be better off without such a selfish son." That hit a nerve. "You know what?" I said. "Maybe you're right. Because ever since you showed up, all you've done is try to milk this family for whatever you can get. I'm done being your scapegoat. Lose my number. I hung up and haven't spoken to her since. Dad's tried to mediate, but I told him I wasn't interested unless she apologized. And we both know that's not happening anytime soon. Now, my relationship with my dad is complicated. He's caught between wanting to keep the peace and knowing she's out of line. I've told him he needs to decide if he's going to keep enabling her behavior or stand up for what's right. Time will tell. As for stepmom and stepbrother, I've made it clear that my boundaries aren't negotiable. If they ever need help, they can find it somewhere else. Looking back, the whole situation has been exhausting, but I've learned a lot about standing up for myself and not letting guilt control me. Family or not, entitlement isn't something I'm willing to tolerate.